Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Small Business Show. My name is Swire Ho. I'm very happy to have my guest on today with me. His name is Danny Ozment from Emerald City Production. Danny is a podcast professional, business strategist for busy professional and solopreneur who want to create podcasts that bring brand loyalty and make their marketing efforts more effective. His goal is to help you clarify your message and publish engaging content that creates customers who trust you before they buy and can't wait to tell the world about you. How you doing, Danny?
I'm doing great, Swire. How are you?
Good. Love to have you on the show. I have lots of questions for you as a podcast host myself.
hmm
Always love to see what the expert will say to improve and probably to make the production value for the show better.
Yeah, definitely. I'm here to help.
Can you let us know more about what you do, and then how did you get to become a business to help businesses help put together podcasts?
Sure. Well, since we're live, everybody can see my drums in the background. I started out as a musician, wanted to be a musician my entire life. I even went to school to study music. I have a master's degree in conducting, actually, in classical music. And that's what I thought my path was going to be. I spent 10 years actually working in the nonprofit arts world, and some life events kind of necessitated for my wife and I we needed some flexibility with one of our children who has some medical issues. And so about 2008 or so, I all of a sudden needed to have a job that was more flexible, that I could do from home. And so that led me down the path of, well, what the heck could I do from home? What do I know in music? What do I know that I could do from home or travel with and be home most of the time? And that was recording. That was at first recording music groups, bands, things like that. I even took that to the point where we were in Nashville. I owned a studio in Nashville for a while. And all during that time of building that home business up, of recording other people and musicians and things like that, I'd started to listen to podcasts. And podcasts helped me in my business. They helped me in my relationships. They helped me in life. They helped me in all these things. And I realized, wow, these are great. I love podcasts. This is amazing. But I noticed that a lot of them had issues sounding good. And as a recording engineer, that was important to me. So I just because I liked some shows, I reached out to them and said, hey, can I help you? I love your show. It's really helping me, but it's hard to listen to because it sounds so bad. And of course, those podcasters were like, yeah, please help. And I started to do it for free on the side. And then I realized pretty quickly that, oh, I could charge for this. Started doing it for a little bit of money. And then over the span of the last 7 years, I went from a full-time recording studio and music to a podcast production facility, where now we have 30 clients that we help produce their shows and get them out every week. We are their marketing support team as well. We are, writing copy. We are designing things for them. We're scheduling social media posts. We're adding stuff to their website. We're building websites for some people. So we do that. And we also help people who are interested in podcasting launch their shows. So from soup to nuts, done for you, from the first step that you need to take to start a podcast to actually launching it to the world, we are involved helping people do that at this point.
Okay, let's dig deeper for especially for podcasts made especially for a business standpoint.
Mhm.
I want to skip the why because I'm sure that you have answered a lot of these questions. Wanted to actually ask you, can you give us a case study or success story for a business client of yours that's actually able to utilize having a podcast for the business?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We have all different types of businesses. We have the solo entrepreneur, whatever you want to call them. We have the busy professional. We have the small business, like the law firm, the accounting firm, and then we even have much larger businesses that aren't even considered small business anymore, like Salesforce, where we help their evangelist teams talk to their areas through podcasts. And I can give you a couple of success stories. Generally, when people come to us to start a podcast, it's because they want to amplify their message in some way. They want to reach more people, or they have an idea that they would really enjoy doing and helping people with through a podcast. So we have, lots of coaches, we have lots of consultants, things like that, people that start out as one but then end up building a team. And one success that I can think of is we have a therapist right now who, she had a private practice. It was her and an assistant, like a receptionist, or she was part of a team. Like sometimes therapists are part of one office, and there were 6 or 7 of them. But she wanted to reach more people. She felt like she was helping these 20 people a week, but that message, the information she was giving to these patients, could help hundreds of people, thousands of people at the same time. She wouldn't have to talk to them directly. So she started a podcast to do that, just to reach more people. And she's the old style success story of what a podcast does. And it's that she was helping people. She was building relationships with the people that were listening to her, and they trusted her. And so when she asked them to share the podcast with other people, you hear it every podcast you listen to. Hey, could you rate, review, subscribe to my podcast, and share it with someone that you think it would help, a family, friend, colleague, all those sorts of things. She was doing that. And every week, every month, there were more downloads. There were more people listening. She went from a point 4 or 5 years ago now where she was getting hundreds of downloads a week to now the point where she's getting hundreds of thousands of downloads per month, just through that growth. And now she's grown to the point where her small business is her podcast. She's no longer got a private practice. She's got a team of 6 or 7 people who are helping her run her online business, operations people, marketing people who are supporting her membership site, people that are helping train her coaches. She's certifying coaches in her system now. Like, she's built an entire business around this podcast, transitioning from another business. So that probably to me is the biggest success story that I've seen of someone taking the idea of a podcast and then turning it into a business. We have plenty of success stories of people like law firms that, again, were looking to build a relationship, build some trust. They were helping people in their offices. We have an immigration law firm where they're based in Silicon Valley, and they were helping plenty of people. They were helping people get into the country to work for startups in Silicon Valley. But they realized there were a lot more people out there. There were a lot of startups that needed help and couldn't find help. And they created a podcast to amplify that message. And that has led to more clients for them. That has led to different types of clients. That's led to them being able to create digital products and digital services that don't have to be administered in their office. So they've gone from a local law firm to a global law firm where they are now they have more people listening in India and China and Australia than they do here in the United States. And so they're helping people incoming and outgoing, down to, the accounting firm who is looking to help more people locally, and decided to do a very regionally specific podcast where they don't really even talk about their business. They talk about their local area. They help people learn about their local area. They became basically like the digital mayor of their area. And now that means that when anybody thinks about, I need an accountant, they think of this accountant because they listen to this podcast that tells them about what restaurants they should be checking out, or had this nice personal interest story of the principal for the local high school that just retired after 25 years and was beloved, and things like that. So it's all sorts of success stories, all sorts of case studies you see in podcasting, but they all come back. You said you wanted to skip the why, but they come back to that why of people want to build relationships. And the way to build a relationship with a lot of people at one time is through a podcast.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, I think it was about 2 years ago now. I spoke to a PR expert, And
Mhm.
then she mentioned that you want to become the go-to expert in your industry, by having a podcast, by having a voice, and especially if you have listeners that follows you
Mhm.
that really can be the expert. For example, in my industry, promotional product, can anyone name 3 promotional product company? Or even in
Yeah,
your space, recording studio. How many recording studio can you name? Maybe a
right.
couple that are really famous, but then
Yeah.
if you are not in the industry, you probably cannot name any
Mhm.
recording studio or promotional product company. So I'm sure that is same for therapists and then same for lawyer. There are a lot of them out there.
Yeah.
So by having a voice, by having your unique sound, then you're having a follower. Like you said,
Mhm.
they could be great locally, but now with the podcast, they're able to grow, have name recognition globally. So
Mhm.
that's a really motivational story.
Yeah, it is.
So I wanted to point out another, I think, an obvious reason for businesses to consider about. You mentioned that a podcast can be used for connecting employees and customers. Why
Mhm.
is that, and how are you helping people do that through podcasts?
Connecting employees and customers. Well, it really it comes back to the all the stuff I just said about building relationships. Because, you talk about small businesses, and a small business can be considered a business that even has 500 people
Mhm.
uh employed. Um what ends up happening when you start to grow and you start to grow is you lose these interconnected interpersonal relationships within your team, within your company. The CEO or the owner of the company starts to become this mythical figure. um, and there's just not a relationship anymore. There's no engagement. Engagement is a term that I use a lot with podcasting. Whether you want to engage with your customers and have a relationship with them and have them trust you and think of you as a friend, or if you're the CEO or COO or uh, even an upper level manager, a C-suite individual in a company, you lose that connection. And the podcast, I've seen several small businesses use podcasts really effectively to connect with their employees. Um, I had actually the pandemic that we've been going through is a recent example of how powerful a podcast can be for certain companies. There was this, and I guess you wouldn't consider them a small business anymore because they're a global company with about 20,000 employees in the natural gas oil refinery business. But they're all over the world. They got people all over the world in different places. And they had just a podcast that they were using, internal podcasts, to connect with their employees, to talk about things people were doing, to go on job sites and follow people around and hear their stories, just to make everyone feel more connected. And then when the pandemic started, 2 years ago now almost, and things started to shut down, and they were needing, they had essential personnel and non-essential personnel, and people worried about the business, like, is the business going to go under? What's the stock prices doing? Like, all this sort of stuff. They used their podcast to continue to communicate with employees, because these were employees that now couldn't see anyone. They weren't seeing their managers. They were being required to stay home, or they were being required to stay separate. So they actually used their podcast as a communication tool. Um, and that's speaking completely internal. I've also seen, for in the customer experience realm, companies use their podcast to make their customers more aware of the people that are actually working in the business. Whether it's, just stories about people who've been employed for a long time, and someone they may never meet but helps get this process to get this done. They share stories like that. But they'll also share stories of, I had a thought of one that I heard recently. um if it comes to me, I'll come back to it. But that idea of creating more of a relationship between the company and the customer, that loyalty, that feeling of, I really understand who this business is, who this company is, as more of a family. And I care more about them because I see what they go through. I see what's important to them. um whether we're talking about social impact, things like that, stories that show what the company is doing outside of trying to make money help that connection, create the connection between the company, the employee, and the customer, the podcast listener in general.
Yeah, I like that, and I found that actually more companies are doing right now.
Mhm.
Want to share one of my recent experience. I'm using the Whoop strap. It's a fitness tracker.
Okay.
So I actually discovered the company through the podcast. So I was looking for ways that during COVID, how to stay healthy and how to track your sleep better. So I
Yeah.
stumbled upon that podcast. So their CEO was one of the hosts, and then they also have the data scientist to interview other guests, right, or athletes who they might sponsor using the straps. So one thing led to another. I actually drawn to their technology. I looked it up for their product. I actually become a subscriber with the Wood strap, and then a lot of what they use. I've never read the menu. Like for products that right now, when you buy like a camera, when
Mhm.
you buy something else, it's like a 300 pages books of stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We're not going to go there. And what we do right now is we actually tune into podcasts if they have one available, or we turn on to YouTube, for example, look at how other people are reviewing it, how they are describing the functionality of it. So if a company that you are smart, you can actually craft out the journey for, if know nothing about your product, all the way up to an expert level of your product and services. How can you guide us as a user through the journey? And I wanted to bring back to the conversation that we have off camera, right? So we can actually use podcasts to help our customer service department to deliver a better message.
Yeah.
Can you explain to us how companies has been doing them?
Well, yeah, and I can say it's very similar to a lot of what authors are doing right now when they publish books. Generally, you will see most books that are published that have either a really large publisher or there's some sort of push behind them, or even people who are individually publishing. They will also release a companion podcast. TV shows do this as well. Netflix does this. They always have a companion podcast. And it's really just that ability to discuss the things that are behind the things that people are interested in, the content they're reading, whether it's a book, whether it's a show they're watching. So it's very similar to if you buy a product and you can read how to use it, having those support stories. So I've seen businesses give stories on um, different use profiles that people have had for the product, how other people are using it, or just how people are using it in general. If it's a piece of technology, if it's a new thing, like I just bought this thing the other day. I don't have it today. It's just like this plexiglass thing that allows you to hang your camera right in front of you on the screen and you can see through it, but the camera's there. So you can
Mm.
like look someone in the eyes when you're on this. I was like, that's so cool. And those people had a podcast too to talk about how other people are using it, how people are using it with teleprompter software, how people to make their experience better. You also have those it's similar to like what Apple does with when they release a new piece of technology, they always have those personal customer stories of, hey, this was produced with the iPhone, or look at this movie that was created, or look at this way this person used this new upgrade in iOS 15.1 or whatever we're on now. It's the space where, just like the reason that all podcasts work, it's a long form piece of content. It's the place where you can take different angles, you can have nuanced conversations, you can have discussions between, hey, let's talk with the developer of this new thing and see how they came up with it. Because if people buy a piece of equipment and they love it, or they buy a piece of tech and they love it, they often will love it more if they know how it was created, or why it was created, or what can you say about the AI algorithm that's in it that won't give away the secrets to it, but tells you why it's working, and that type of thing. Just always coming back to that, it builds a relationship. It builds it has a connection that people are missing these days, because especially over the last 2 years where we've not been around each other as much, we've had masks on in front of each other, we've lost some of that personal connection. Anything you can do with anything you're creating or anything you're releasing or any content or whatever that allows you to have more of a personal relationship is beneficial. And podcasts are so easy to adapt to do that in any situation.
I think the only way to build a true brand is to have the relationship with
Yeah.
your clients and customer, because the
Mhm.
more they believe in you, the more what I call it to become a mini advocates. Right? There are
Mhm.
certain brand that we are really connected with. So whoever that we come in contact with, will ask them. No one is paying us, right?
Yeah.
Say you got to try this brand. You're gonna
Yeah.
try this, gadgets that I have. They're amazing. So that they're actually promoting your brand on behalf of you,
Mhm.
and by having a place for them periodically, like a podcast, then you're drawing all the people that are connected and trust your company to
Mhm.
be listening to more information that you want to put out there, especially for a company who interview their customer sometime.
Yes.
And that I think is a true way to build your brand, because these are people who had used your product and services
Mhm.
before. Obviously, if they be on your show, they're happy customers, right?
Yeah.
And then they're actually telling others how they can use your product. Maybe there are ways that you never thought of. Imagine how we use our camera, how we
Mhm.
use our car. People do crazy things with products that they buy. So
Yeah.
they're actually developing new area, I would say. And if you are smart marketers, then you
Yeah.
actually finding out, and from the data that you can receive from the podcast,
Mhm.
what people are tuning into. Maybe there are certain topics that you're putting out there. There are a lot of engagement. There are
Yeah.
some topics that you put out there who might have less. So as a data driven marketing person, if you are, then you know which area you could have done more. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that you could do a lot, especially
Mhm.
on the podcast right now.
Well, yeah, when I get a client coming in and they say, "Oh, I want to do a podcast. I've been told I need to do a podcast or whatever," and they have ideas. Sometimes they've got too many ideas. I talk to them first about how the beautiful thing, and it comes back to that point that I made about podcast being a long form piece of content. They are also a long term investment, because you have to do them, you have to stay consistent with them, but you have to do it for 6 months, a year, before you really, 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 truly start to feel momentum a lot of the time, because podcast audience, it's hard to build them up, but they're some of your most loyal audience. We have stats where we know 93% of podcast listeners listen to more than half or all of a podcast episode, every single episode. So we know, okay, these are going to be the people that spend the most time with us. They're going to be a smaller number. So I have to keep doing it, but it's long form. And so I can talk about a lot of different things. And I talk to people about how the podcast listener they may be there because you're talking about a certain thing. They may be there because they frequent your business, but they stay because of you. They stay because of the host. They build a relationship, a friendship with you. And so you have this flexibility to start to figure out, okay, what I've got this idea for the podcast, and this is what the podcast is going to be. But let's see if the audience actually likes that. And let's ask the audience questions during the podcast episode that we want them to respond to. Let's engage with them. Let's get feedback from them. Because, I've had many people start a podcast, and then 7 or 8 episodes in, they start to shift because people have asked them, "Oh, could you speak more about that thing that you mentioned for 2 minutes in that episode where you talked about all this other stuff?" That's what I'm really interested in. And then they get another 2 people that say, "Oh, yeah, we want to hear about that too." And 7, 8 episodes in, they start to shift and they're like, "Oh, let's talk about this." 6 months in, their podcast doesn't look anything like what they thought it was going to be, because they never it's this perfect place to engage with your audience, to engage with your customers, to engage with your stakeholders, your community, whatever you want to call them. You can engage. It's non-threatening because they hear you. They hear you being authentic, because you can't talk for 20 minutes without being authentic, without being you. They stick around because they like you, so then they feel comfortable asking you things. And then if you actually respond to those things, they feel even better because they're like, oh, this is cool. This is our private place where I can hang out with Danny and talk to him and ask him questions. And then every week on Wednesday morning, he shows up while I'm driving to work and I hear him for 20 minutes and he talks to me. He's talking to me. So you get that flexibility, you get that time to try some things out and to learn more about your audience. And that's partly too why I tell people when they're doing a podcast, you have to do your podcast like you're speaking to one person. It can't be like you're always speaking to this huge audience. You connect with that one person. And I even go further, like here's a little tip for people that are interviewing. I pretend when I'm interviewing, even if I'm recording it ahead of time, like you're live, you get that benefit of I'm live right now. I'm talking to the people that are listening. If you're even pre-recording, pretend like your listener is sitting at a table with you in a restaurant and the guest is across from you. So you're interviewing the guest, but you're like the person is sitting there with you, the listener is sitting there with you. So you're going to acknowledge that, like you're going to say things like we would love to know, or like for all the people that are with us today, little phrases like that can get the listener feeling even more intently that you care about them. This is a relationship, even though you've never met. Your friendship. That actually a story that I love to tell about this and the power of this. That therapist I mentioned earlier, she lives in Charlotte, North Carolina now, and was in Nashville before that. And she and her family, she has some sons and they're college age. So they went on a vacation to Spain to drop off one of the sons for like a semester abroad. And so they turned it into a family vacation. And, they're doing their vacation. Someone had a headache. And so she went to the local pharmacy to buy some ibuprofen. Walked in the door of the pharmacy and the woman behind the counter yelled, "Oh my gosh, you're Michelle. I know you. I listened to your podcast. I knew you were going to be here, but I never expected to see you." Like she ran into someone halfway around the world who listened to her podcast and considered her a friend. They'd never met each other. Like literally had never met each other, never talked. She'd only listened to this woman's podcast. And that was the power, is that she felt like she knew her. She felt like she could trust her. She felt like she could do everything that she said because Michelle showed up every week with that podcast to help her out, to help her in her relationships, to help her with her own personal issues and things like that. That's what it comes down to. It always comes back to that, is that people trust you and you have the flexibility and time to work on all those ideas.
Great. So let's put it to good use, Danny. I've been listening. So for those of us in business who wanted to start a podcast, in a quick overview, what are some of the involvement that we need to expect? What are some of the budget that you also, if you also touch on, or if you already have some sort of equipment? We've been doing, for example, Zoom call. Can we even start with that first? What would you suggest at a overview standpoint?
Yeah, I often talk about, like, when people think about starting a podcast, they face 3 hurdles. Generally it's time, tech, or too many ideas. And we talked about too many ideas. The time part of it is just, I ask people at first to recognize that a podcast is time consuming. It takes a lot of work. So you either need to have the time to do it, 3 hours a week for a lot of people, 3 to 4 hours a week, to think about creating it and recording it and editing it and getting it ready and publishing it and all those types of things, or have the support to do it. So like, that's why my business exists. We support people who don't have the time to do it themselves. They have the time to record, but that's about it. Or have a team that can support you. When it comes down to the tech, that has gotten significantly easier over the last few years, which is wonderful. I forget which microphone you're using, but I'm using the Audio-Technica ATR 2100X, which is, I think mine's the 2100. It's the older model, but it's a USB microphone that can also connect to a traditional mixing console or audio interface as well. It's $100 or less. You plug it right into your computer. Generally, like even in StreamYard here, it automatically recognized, or Zoom or whatever, that's my microphone. It should be using it. That's really all you need, because then you can use StreamYard or Zoom or Riverside.fm if you want to like do interviews and communicate with people, or you can use QuickTime. You can use GarageBand. You can use Audacity, which is free, to record your solo episodes if you wanted to do that. So those are like free options that most people have. And then if you wanted to get more complicated, let's say you're not having someone produce your show for you, you need a piece of software called a digital audio workstation, DAW. And there's lots of great ones out there now that are really easy to use. The one, my go-to that I'm recommending to everybody right now, is called Descript. It is an app where you can download it and it installs right on your computer, and then you can record in it. And when you record, it transcribes your recording, and you can edit the audio by using the transcription. It's like a Google Doc. If you delete words, it deletes the audio.
Hmm.
Now, it can be a little heavy-handed sometimes, and that's why it pays to have like an engineer like me or my team involved. But for someone who just really wants to get a podcast out in the world, it's a pretty good tool to make a good sounding podcast that is edited. And I think their really expensive version is $30 a month on subscription. So you can use it as long as you need it, and then you're done. If you don't decide to go, like, so let's say you wanted to do a 10 episode podcast series. So really that, and then having one of the services I like is called, let's see, I think I'll add it to the comments. Or actually, I can't put it in the comments. It's called Auphonic.com, AUPHONIC.com. It's AI mastering. So essentially, you can create your recording, you can edit it a little bit in Descript, and then you could upload your final recording, and Auphonic processes it so that it's broadcast standard, so that it sounds as good. It reduces noise levels and things like that. And it sounds close to what most other podcasts sound like on Apple's podcast directory or whatever. Okay. And so that's maybe a total of like $150. You know, you need a media host to actually publish your show each week, and that's $5 to $20 a month, but it's not an expensive proposition anymore. And the tech is relatively easy to use. You can definitely get more complicated. You can have more tools. You can have more bells and whistles. But you certainly don't need to do like what podcasters were doing 5 or 6 years ago, which was, you know, buy $300, $500 microphones and mixing boards, and a lot of that stuff can be done through software now and through apps that you don't need to worry about anymore.
Yeah, I think at the end it's, how skillful you are.
Mhm.
That's still for myself, it's a long way to learn about.
Yeah.
Because I've listened to and watched YouTube hosts that I like every day. They don't have a mic. They have a regular headset on, and
Yeah.
they have over 100,000 views. So
Yeah.
sometimes it depends on the content. And I've
Well, and
heard
I
of this.
also would say to that, with YouTube, you have the video element.
Mhm.
YouTube still, they even did a test once where they found that if the audio quality was bad on a video, less people would click away faster than if the video quality was bad. The thing you have to remember is with a podcast, because people are only listening and you are millimeters from their eardrums, your sound quality has to be pretty good. So like those headset mics may work for YouTube, but you have to, use them properly to do a podcast, because people will get annoyed. It's kind of like, I use the analogy of, you would expect a restaurant to serve edible food. So a podcast has to have sound that you're capable of listening to week in and week out without being annoyed.
Mhm. Yeah. I've heard of this idea also on forums, and I might not 100% agree, but what they would say in terms of a business development standpoint, having a podcast will give you certain amount of credibility.
Mhm.
So, for example, if you're a salesperson, if you're reaching out prospecting every day, for example, on LinkedIn, right? By reaching out to your person whom you might want to go through, instead of saying, I want to speak to so and so. And
Mhm.
instead, you say, I have a podcast about this
Yeah.
type of topic that I would like to talk to your CEO. Would
Yes.
he or she be interested in coming on? Chances
Mhm.
are you are likely and more possible to get through those doors,
Yes.
then if you just call them out of the blue, do you need my services? Right.
Yes,
And you get
that's a
thrown out.
strategy I see work all the time. Using you it works. I tell consultants all the time, use that as a strategy with your podcast. If there's a company that you want to work with, find some way to interview somebody from that company to start to build that rapport with them and show them a little bit about what you know. And even going back to like the first part of what you said there, if you have 100 episodes of a podcast, people see that as a significant body of work. That if you created 100 episodes, that's significant knowledge. That's a significant amount of time commitment. You must be an expert. You must be an authority of some type to be that consistent. And it works. That works on its own. In addition to the, hey, use it as an in. Even the thing you were saying about LinkedIn, it's much better to say, if you're not even reaching out to get somebody on your show, but just reaching out with a resource like, hey, I see you talk about this. We use this as a technique for pitching other podcasters. I also work with this, and I did an episode recently on this topic. I would love for you to check it out and see if there are any ideas in here that might be helpful for you. That's a much easier ask than, hey, could we set up a sales call? or check this out. Like, it's, hey, look at this stuff. I'm giving you a resource that you're welcome to check out. And some people will, some people won't, but at least I took the time to think about something you might need. Like, that's why I say, when other businesses, or if you have a podcast yourself, if you're pitching other podcasters to be on their show as an expert, getting some idea of knowing what they talk about, seeing how your expertise might fit in their topic area, or what they're going to cover on the podcast, and showing some sort of just synergy with what they are trying to provide to their audience or their stakeholders can be really helpful in getting you in the door.
Okay, that's good advice. So, Danny, I know that we could probably go on for another few
Sure.
hours with this, and but
I can talk about this for hours.
for all of us who wanted to find out more about what we can do with a podcast, what would be a good way to connect with you?
The best way to connect with me, if you are the type of person that knows you want to do a podcast but knows you're going to need help, you can go to emeraldcitypro.com to find out about my podcast production agency. But if you're not at that point yet, but okay, a podcast is in the cards and I need to figure out what it takes to get one started and all that sort of stuff, go to dannyosment.com/roadmap. That is a checklist that we have that literally, like, I don't like people to make mistakes. I don't like to make mistakes myself. So that's a checklist of 20 some items that is in the right order, that basically says, do this first, do this next, think about this, buy this, sign up for this, record this, upload it here, that type of thing, where it's step by step so that people don't go down any rabbit holes that they don't need to yet. Like you were talking about, like, oh, reach out to this corporation and try to get the CEO interviewed. Like, don't even think about this stuff yet. First, you need to have a podcast. You need to get it out there. I tell people, like, the one piece of advice that I always give people is to just start ugly. We know it as minimum viable product, right? You got to put something out there to find out if it works. And so I run into too many people who've been thinking about, oh, for a year or 2 years, I've been thinking about starting a podcast. I'm like, oh my gosh, do you know if you'd started a podcast 2 years ago, what your audience would be like now and how big it would be? Even if you just started some crappy little podcast that you were week by week trying to figure it out, you would have started to build something that at this point now would be potentially thousands of downloads a week, that now you're starting from square one in a more competitive podcast market, and more people who are talking about the same thing potentially now. So I tell people, get that roadmap and just start. Like, figure out something to start so that you can get moving and build up that momentum.
So for everyone listening, I will reach out to Danny to get all the links and the software that he mentioned during the show,
Sure.
and I'm going to put it on all the show notes so everyone can check it out. Danny, thank you so much for coming on today, and love talking about podcasting anytime.
Thank you. I loved having it. Love being here.